Greetings, humans. Zach here, welcoming you to another book discussion with Sequestered Superlative. Every week we get together and talk about what it is we've been reading the week prior, how we feel about it, and how many times it did or didn't blow our minds. Current book calendar, upcoming reading, book discussion dates, and more can be found at sequesteredsuperlative.com. Enjoy the show. Alright, here we go. This is discussion 3 for 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Some of the points we go over are delayed gratification and sacrifice, how hard, meaningful things are to do, life lies in their extreme challenges, truth as an instigator for positive change, memory as a tool, and conversation as a means for developing philosophy. Join us next week for the last discussion, number 4, for 12 Rules for Life, covering Rules 10, 11, and 12. Okay, what do you guys think of this rule number 7? Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
That is a good chapter.
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like that's definitely hard to do because a lot of times what is meaningful is, yeah. Well, I mean, he kind of went over it really well. It's like it's not easy.
Yeah. That was really cool.
Yeah.
There's definitely like a lot of common sense things that were good to put out there and like flesh out, I feel like.
A lot of people. One thing that is really was really helpful to me is the whole focus on the future thing, because like it can be so difficult to do anything if you're not replacing it with something, or to stop doing anything. Like if you have something that you just want to stop doing,
Right.
you have to start doing something else.
Yeah. It was cool when he talking about like our own totalitarianism towards ourselves, and like that's not a viable strategy for like improvement. We have to actually understand ourselves, and then we can move forward changing things.
Yeah, because it's like one of those things where it's like everybody always says, "Oh, accepting it, admitting it is the first step," and that's what so many people miss. And I've missed that so much. Just it's like you can say it, but it's you believing it. You can admit, like you have to admit it to yourself more than you have to admit it to other people. Because you can say, "Yeah, I understand. I need to change," but I mean, do you? If you're not changing,
Do you really? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a good like halfway point to the book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it sums up all the other ones, but I feel like it encompasses a lot of it.
yeah.
I think a lot of the time I think we do spend a lot of time doing things that are expedient.
Like
And,
pizza.
yeah, like pizza. God damn it. I don't know. I liked it. I think that
I thought the sacrifice bit was cool, where he went off for like 15, 20 pages of like explaining the whole biblical message of sacrifice, which seemed like very, and how like Christianity's become diluted, but it really like served to a purpose in establishing values and what do you say, like a nesting place for the
Because it's like you had to give up something that was meaningful.
Yeah. I like how he kind of like framed the like the upside of like the dogmatic tendencies of like modern Christianity as a possible like repository for the, even if diluted, kind of idea of living like Christ, which is to bear like the ultimate burden of being in like day to day.
Yeah, that was honestly it wasn't specifically that part of the book because I just now got past that chapter, but he has talked a lot about that in length in a lot of his lectures, and maybe and like some of his like the more college oriented stuff he's done, like and in some of the mythology stuff he has like had tangents about that. And doing that was really what made me I just completely lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
Something about bearing burdens.
Oh yeah, bearing burdens and like you have to bearing the burden of Christ. Basically, like you have to be the best version. Like because he's talked about like how Christ is supposed to be like the best version of yourself, and so to me, this chapter a lot like that whole spiel he went on about was like about how it's like the with the modern day Christianity, I really feel it's like you have to be like Jesus, but that's the thing. I feel like he's talked about how Jesus and living like him is more of a metaphor for you have to be the best version of yourself, and a lot of times that requires massive amounts of sacrifice because it's like what would the best version of me do? Would it the best version of me go to bed right now because I know I have it's like I really want to play this video game but I have a test tomorrow, like that kind of a thing. It's like it seems like super like yeah, that just makes sense, but it's like a lot of people struggle with that. And but really what it is just, you have to make sacrifices. You have to be the best version of yourself, to live like Christ, who is representative of the best of the earth of an earthly being, the best earthly being. Basically, to live like him, you have to sacrifice everything else.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like really, really. I loved that. Like, and I honestly, this part of the book is like a really. I felt like it was kind of a it wasn't dumbed down because it still had like a lot of what it had a really like summarize really good summary. Like this was a fantastic summary of some of his lectures, but I feel like if he had maybe talked a little more about the whole like God being representative of what is impossible, and or like God being representative of what we don't of like the goodness we don't understand, and like Jesus being representative of the kind of impossible goodness, but it's like this is the best. This is so good, no human could ever do this, but it's a human doing it, kind of a thing. I feel like that would have made the chapter a little more impactful, I guess. But I think it was a fine summary of that. I just feel like his lectures kind of, I guess, gave weight to that idea a little bit better.
Hmm.
Yeah, I definitely think that his um the concept, the way that he talks about the concept of how sacrifice is the thing that makes us human, like more than anything else. Like just the idea that we can do something now to save for later, um, kind of separates us from like all other animals. Like I know that he talks about how yeah the beavers are making their dams or whatever, but they're not doing it so that they can do really complicated stuff. It's just like a thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and there's really no limit to what humans can sacrifice in order to achieve. It's really just like up to their imagination to
Hmm.
think of like uh, what it's going to be, and that's kind of something that we talked about with the first book. How like we just imagine stuff first, and then we try to figure out how to do it. But a lot of it has to do with the
Let's just hope the thing that gets sacrificed for the singularity isn't like everyone who isn't the 1%.
Everyone jump in this pot and we're going to stir you.
No, man, they're gonna turn us all into orange juice, just like in Neon Genesis Evangelion. There's orange Gatorade.
Yeah, I
That'd
definitely
be
think it's
cool.
interesting too the way that he sort of shows how like the reason Christianity was successful is because it had a lot of these ideas, and
Right.
then the reason why it kind of petered out is because it had solved a lot of the problems. I think that was this chapter where he talks about
Yeah.
how like the problem of slavery and like the problem of like women not being equal or like things like that. Like objectively, those aren't obvious ideas.
Yeah.
And it was, for the most part, Christianity that solved them.
Yeah.
And then
And
it
it
was
wasn't
only
like a.
after that when like they're sort of running out of things to fix, or like things are changing due to technology that makes some of their solutions no longer necessary.
Yeah, that to me, I actually have a really interesting theory about that I want to touch on after you're done, Jonathan.
Yeah.
That is stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting to think about. It seems correct at what he's talked, what he says, and it just seems like there are. It seems like I think he talks about Nietzsche, how God is dead and all that in this chapter, and just really interesting. Just seems like that is probably what happened.
I feel like Christianity was necessary to bring the world to this point, and after this, it's going to be the Eastern religions. I don't think individuality is going to be the future. I don't think that's the future. I think we're going to have to become more collectivist, like the Buddhist and the Taoist, and like all the Eastern religions. Like
Resistance is
have
futile.
do what
Submit to the Borg.
exactly? Except we are the Borg. Because it's like once we get machines that are going to automate everything, what are we going to do? How is anyone going to make money unless they're one of the people fixing or programming those things?
Infinite playtime.
I mean, we can't all work at McDonald's.
Oh, no one's gonna work at McDonald's.
I mean, they will once all the freaking. Well, yeah, exactly. No one's going to even work at McDonald's.
Yeah, it'll just all be robots. No, I mean, I think that's going to be something. I mean, that's kind of another conversation, but like, basically, if we reach that point, we'll probably also reach universal income point, and then if we do that, what is everybody going to do with their time? Probably nothing.
Well, I mean, there's
And
that
then
theory that that like 60% of ants actually do nothing, and that they're just around, and then like 20% of them do all the work, and the other 20% maybe it's 80%. I don't remember. There's some like huge amount. It's not any past 60, but there's some huge amount, like 50 or 60% of ants actually do nothing. They just exist. They just eat the food, wander around, and look for stuff. And then 20% of them are the ones who do the actual work, and then the other 20% are like management or something.
yeah, but the difference is that the the ants don't get bored. Like, I don't know if you've ever had like you know, a long time out of work, but like you get bored, even if your money is not a concern. Like if so I feel like if like like eventually you're just like, I need to be working, I need to be doing something.
I feel like we are going to have a really grim future where it's either going to be like it's like that whole incel thing is happening more and more now.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that a lot of that I think that a lot of um the things, the attitudes that are being popularized and things like that, with like men's rights stuff and all that, is a sort of a direct result of some of the things that we're talking about here,
Yeah.
where people think that they're expecting one thing and then they're getting, and then but culture has changed to something else.
I don't even think it's that they're expecting one thing. I think that this society actively hates and discourages certain things that in when but at the same time promoting stuff that makes those things more prevalent in society, you know? Like
Maybe.
so one interesting statistic I read was that like if you look at Japan or something, which and in Japan again is like a freak case, but it's been really good at like there's a lot of freaky shit that goes on in Japan that you can't really apply that to the rest of the world because it's Japan. But like it's a good test case because a lot of the stuff that happens in Japan first starts happening to some extent in the rest of the world. Like Japan has had a word for incels since the 90s. It's like the perma virgins who are just stay at home or they work and then they go home and complain about women on the internet and just play games and stuff. They've had a word for that since the 90s, and now we have a word for it. So
Yeah, maybe.
it's like they had that sort of what we had, but theirs ended before ours because of I'm not actually sure why the economic bubble ended, but I don't know. Like, we're gonna have to figure out some way of, I guess. I feel like education would fix a lot of this stuff, but we have such a horrible educational system in America.
Well,
Like,
I
it's
think that's
really
kind of like
just.
what this chapter is talking about is that
Finding meaning.
a lot of people, yeah, there isn't a meaning that people are finding. Like, it's so easy to do nothing right now. It's so easy to only do the things that are expedient, like video games and like
Even just
computers
looking at
and stuff.
Facebook, you have your phone attached to your body at all times.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes easier and easier to not do things that are meaningful because, like he's talking about, things that are meaningful are going to take sacrifice.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out though that we have this like abundance of opportunity for doing essentially meaningless or expedient things. And as far as like the boredom or the dissatisfaction that comes from not doing like meaningful things, not having a meaning, I think that that in and of itself is quite a prod to do the opposite, to find the things that are meaningful and do them, which we're seeing with like the crazy, ridiculous, like popularity of Jordan Peterson stuff. Like he's really just rephrasing or just framing things that were common sense for a lot of the last couple hundred years. And the fact, and he said this, the fact that that's such a poignant thing and people are so like desperate for it is just like horrifying and whatever. But
I mean, I have
that,
another theory about why he's so popular. I think it's because he doesn't directly just say, he never directly indirect or I say indirectly. He never directly just dismisses any idea that he believes to be harmful or bad. He says, "Well, that seems like a really attractive option." You know, he kind of lends cadence to other people's ideas and then rips them apart. Like most people are just there to hear the other people get ripped apart, but I feel like he's allowing for people who maybe are on the fence about the ideas to see that he's giving what the other person is saying, he's giving it its fair weight. He's not just there to argue. He kind of he understands to some extent.
Yeah, I mean,
Eh,
that's really how you have to do any kind of argument. Like, that's like the concept of a
But if you think about how
rather than a straw
most of the
man.
popular TV people
Oh yeah.
argue, you're not getting that. It's like look at frickin' um, like it's so many of the people who are really popular on the right and the left are just people who will like it's like Colbert, all the late night hosts that are like really leftist just sort of laugh at people and they're just really mean about it. And then like you get all the people who are in those like those stupid compilations on YouTube where it's like liberals owned by Ben Shapiro's logic or something. And it's like those guys are assholes too. Everybody's an asshole. He's just really Canadian, and I think people like it.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's very careful not to just be like, "No, that's dumb. Listen to me."
which is rule 9.
Explain it. I mean, I don't know if he's talked about it, but someone recently is. I think maybe it was Sam Harris. They've talked about it. Really, what you need to do anytime there's an argument, rather than create a straw man, which is what people do a lot of the time with a lot of Jordan Peterson's ideas, is you need to create an Iron Man where you understand and are able to argue their side stronger than they are,
Yeah,
and only then will you be able to effectively tear it apart, or which should also be a perfectly willing outcome, you realize that they were right.
yeah,
um, because and that's another thing that I think that sort of separates Jordan Peterson from a lot of these other uh, people. I think he really just comes across as trying to figure out what is actually correct, rather than sort of picking a side first, and then everything has to justify those means.
yeah.
Um, I don't think I mean, he doesn't agree with the right on a lot of things either. I mean, I don't think he would even be considered right wing. I think that he's just
I mean,
definitely
he keeps
not
saying he's
left.
not, but everyone insists on labeling him that.
Yeah, and I mean that's just because of the simplicity of our system. I mean, if you just have the right and the left, then I mean that's just ridiculous, like on its face.
Yeah,
But I mean,
no, it's
it's funny because they'll do interviews with the left wing media, and they'll ask him all these ridiculous questions, and he like when he answers them, like he kind of has to like say, well, that isn't what I meant or said at all. This is what I mean. And then when he's on Fox News, they'll say ridiculous things as well. And he's like, well, it's more like this. And like he's
he even
having to
has to
talk.
correct the people who agree with
Oh
him.
yeah.
It's so sad.
Well, the thing is, a lot of the news people, like, it's just so fake. Like, they don't care what he's saying at all. They just want to make the left look stupid.
Yeah, no,
Like,
it really is just sad as all hell.
he had an interview. I think it was on Bill Maher or something like that.
Oh God, I can't stand him.
Well, I thought it was a pretty good interview. Although at one point he does kind of ask some difficult questions about how they were talking about Trump and just kind of tearing into Trump and Trump supporters and stuff. And he asked a question about how did they think America was going to handle like the division between people, because like obviously, something like 40% of the country
Yeah,
supported Trump at one point, and those are people that we have to live with. Like, what did the liberals think they need to do for that? And they couldn't really answer that question, because there's not an easy answer there. And
yeah.
then later he was on Fox News talking about it, and the Fox News guy was like, "So you were telling them about how they just have to like respect the people that voted and like live with the result?" And he's like, "Well, that's not what I said." It's like everyone's just gonna twist everything he says. So
Because they all, I feel like that's one of the things that got him popular was how many people sort of just wanted to use his sort of credentials to sort of put words in his mouth, because it's really attractive to do that because it's like professor of psychology, Jordan Peterson, it's like, oh, he's saying it, so there must be something to it.
yeah,
It's
I don't know.
just
He just
so.
seems very genuine. Like, I think he genuinely, and he also isn't really trying to do anything like other than like promote individual responsibility.
He's just a mild mannered lobster interviewer.
Damn lobsters.
But I don't know. I mean, um, I definitely think that the sort of search for meaning part of this chapter is sort of like the core of his, like, of what he's saying. Like, everything that you do uh,
It's got to
really should
mean
be towards
something.
that meaning, because
Yeah.
like the alternative really is that it's not. Like,
And
there
then,
really aren't very many neutral things that we do.
what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
how he sums up and he doesn't say like this is what's going to make you happy. He explicitly says this isn't happiness, this isn't bliss, this is meaning. This is the thing that, what does he say? He says, if the value structure is aimed at the betterment of being, the meaning revealed will be life sustaining. It will provide the antidote for chaos and suffering. It will make everything matter. It will make everything better. And that's just like really
Yeah,
an
I think it's at
interesting
the
like
very
conclusion.
end of the chapter. I mean, as you search for meaning, there's still going to be order and there's still going to be chaos. Like, and he talks earlier about how you wouldn't ever actually want to get rid of chaos, or you really can't. But if you try, you're going to be like totalitarian,
Is
whatever
that
that
right?
word is.
I think I found it.
And then he talks about how, I'm just going to scroll the end of the chapter if I can find it.
That's
But
where he's talking about faith, right? He says there's no faith in
um,
courage and no sacrifice in doing what is expedient. There's no careful observation that actions and presuppositions matter or that the world is made of what matters. To have meaning in your life is better than to have what you want, because you may neither know what you want nor what you truly need. Meaning is
uh,
something that comes upon you of its own accord.
what I'm thinking of is, I found it. It's meaning is the ultimate balance between, on the one hand, the chaos of transformation and the possibility and possibility, and on the other, the discipline of pristine order, whose purpose is to produce out of the attendant chaos a new order, and that will be even more immaculate and capable of bringing forth still more balance and productive chaos and order.
Right.
So, like, it's you just move more and more forward, and you have a more productive chaos and order.
Right.
You're never trying to get rid of either one, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Right. Yeah. Meaning is what's up.
Yeah.
So rule 8, tell the truth, or at least don't lie.
Yeah.
Kind of
Dude.
starts off talking about taking the easy way out or telling the truth. He's talking about how those are completely different ways of living and not just choices. I thought that was pretty cool because
Yeah.
you really have to like embody that philosophy in order to like accomplish that, and that totally changes like every facet of the structure of your life and how things happen.
Yeah.
Hmm. No, it's really hard not to lie to people, and I mean like not lie as in like tell blatant mistruths about something, but like everybody kind of knowingly misleads people a lot. It's like very frequent,
It's
and
almost like our default.
yeah, because it's like it's considered rude almost to tell the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, it
But
really is.
I don't know. It's allowed. I feel like it's kind of one of those things. There's this adage about how if you all pretend if people it's like if you parody something long enough a lot people who don't get the joke will come along, and it's like how 4chan used to just be a bunch of people who were smart pretending to be retarded, and now 4chan is just a bunch of retarded people being retarded. And it's like that happens on a lot of websites. It's like look at Reddit. I wasn't around for Reddit's heyday of being the more intellectual site on the internet, but it still has that reputation, and everyone on the site thinks they're smart. But it's basically just YouTube comments that think they have legitimacy because they're not on YouTube. Like if you look at any of the comments on a lot of the articles and stuff.
What does it have to do with
So
honesty?
like like what I'm saying is it's like I feel like there's a lot of things that society feels are important and are fighting really hard for that have been brought about because people aren't telling the truth.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what, because the first part is like, first part of this chapter is about like sort of like lying to people and how like when you lie to people or you're not honest with people, then it's kind of like they can tell,
Yeah, no.
and it like I'm sure we all know people that like don't seem to be that genuine, and like it's not like it's always a bad thing, but it's at
Yeah.
the very least kind of a bland thing. Like it's a boring kind of thing.
There's also the kind of people who can trick you into thinking they're genuine, but don't mean like a word of what they're saying, or they're like just kind of white lying all the time to the point where it's like you're not really sure who you're really talking to, and that can be just as kind of disconcerting, you know?
I'd have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure I saw some kind of study at one point where like they did like facial recognition stuff on people telling the truth or people lying, and I think you basically like the facial recognition stuff can pick up a lie or a truth, and that means that probably humans can too, even though we might not know it. So like we may still believe the lie, but I think on some level we probably also are able to tell when things are like feel wrong.
Yeah, it was
Um,
like the example he gave about like the paranoid person he had in psychotherapy and how like hyper aware they
yeah,
were. So he had to be like absolutely sure that he was coming from the right place.
yeah, and I mean, but I think that kind of goes for everybody. I don't
Right.
think everyone is necessarily as in tune with that like sense, but like I don't know. Sometimes you just there's just some people that are harder to that you just don't like for some reason. Like I think maybe that's it sometimes. Um, and I think that kind of like how he's talking about how like he told that person that they weren't a student, so they couldn't go with them. Like they're going to be sad for a second, but then they're going to be fine because it's true.
Right.
And like a truth, like an initial truth, is usually so quick and so like there's nothing that it's built up on that it's usually not going to be that devastating. It's usually when you find a truth at the end of a bunch of lies that like it's worse. But then I think the part after that, which I found, I think, more powerful was when he starts talking about the life lies, because those are lies that you're telling yourself, and you're saying, like, this is the way I want things to be, this is the way they have to be, and then you live your life according to that assumption, never checking to see whether or not that's still the case. And that to me is like how people waste their whole lives.
Yeah, I've definitely fallen into that before. That's why I'm here.
I know I definitely have as well. Um,
Yeah,
That's
same.
that's one of the reasons I quit Value.
yeah,
Ironically enough, was like, I mean, I've again watched a lot of his other lectures, but
I think we've all probably watched everything that he's ever made. I know I have, but
it's great, isn't it? He's
oh
just
yeah, no, it's phenomenal. But
like, what did we do to deserve this man? No, no, but
Pizza.
pizza
It's a pretty good answer to a lot of things.
really is. Yeah, but I definitely, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what else?
I mean, I know I've done that. Like like I think the probably most obvious example I can think of is with like relationships or maybe like education stuff, when I'll tell myself that this is something that I want, and then I'll make all of these decisions stack up on that decision or that assumption that that's what I want, when at some point I know that it isn't what I want, and then I continue making decisions based on what it is, or that it was
Yeah,
what I want, and then it's like those, and then eventually you get to the point where you're living reality that is just wrong.
yeah. A lot of times I'll when it is for me, it's making plans with people or like saying, yeah, I definitely want to do that, especially with art, because have I will sometimes I'll give myself so much to do for people, and then realize that I'm not like that serious about either. A, I'm not serious about it, or B, I don't have time to do it, or C, there's a lot of other stuff I have to do. Like, well, it's just like, but it's like at the time you're really hype about it, but it's like if you ask yourself, it's like, well, am I going to do it? Am I going to is this what I will want later when I'm not, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the constant like almost like reality checks that he kind of suggests, that you have to like take stock and like learn to kind of like split yourself, to bifurcate yourself and like talk to yourself and understand that there's a dialogue that needs to happen almost constantly to evaluate if you're falling into those lies. And then,
Yeah.
to do that, you have to like admit that, and then you have to commit to not be like willfully blind.
Yeah. I think we are willfully blind, like a disturbing amount of the time.
Yeah. It's interesting how he describes that. I don't remember exactly what he says, but what does he say? He says it's the worst sort of lie. It's subtle. It avails itself of easy rationalizations. Willful blindness is the refusal to know something that could be known.
Somewhere he talks about how if you do it long enough, he talks about it with the forest fires and stuff, about how like eventually the whole structure of your life is built upon a lie, and then it all just has to go.
Yeah.
And like that can be devastating. Like that's, and he also talks somewhere else about how PTSD is when something happens that like you just is so far out of the reality of what you thought was going to happen or what you thought was possible, that it like traumatically affects you.
Yeah.
And like that can happen for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Any sort of lie that you've built up that you thought it was true, when it finally comes crashing down, like that can be devastating.
Yeah, I've definitely had that experience like pretty precisely, where there's been a web of deceit, and then it all got revealed to like the people that were being deceived, and like it was just like, well, the whole house is on fire, and we pretty much need to just tear it down and start over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can really only do that so many times in your life
Yeah.
before you're done.
Before it starts becoming permanent and you realize you're just going to have to keep you totally just installed a room you can't use, but it's going to have to stay there.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it comes down to like, do you learn the lesson then, or do you just like get scared and run, and then like build up more lies to distance yourself from the destruction of the previous web?
I feel like some people live their entire lives to do that. They're just always running away from things. It's like we all have that one friend who it's never their fault that everything's going wrong.
Right.
Sure. And we make up stories about why things happened and all that kind of stuff to explain things not going our way.
Yeah.
Like it's so easy to be like, oh yeah, all of my exes were just terrible people. What are the chances of that?
Like 0. It's
Yeah.
like far more likely that I was deceiving
Right.
myself, that I wanted to be in a situation and dug that deep.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
maybe I just want it. Maybe I don't want to have to look at the parts of myself that made
Yeah.
it not work.
Yeah, you
You
said
know?
something about the doing those, like doing the opposite of telling the truth by omission or commission, like produces the personality of a demon. And it's,
Yeah.
yeah, and then you just embody that, and it just iterates and iterates, and you build up the leaning tower of whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful
It's
stuff.
scary, honestly.
I think the coolest thing, though, about the whole concept here in Rule 8 is that, you know, once you start or commit to telling the truth, or at least say, like, I want to start doing this, and then start, evaluating your potential lifeline type situations, then that basically evolves your consciousness. You start seeing things different and listening to yourself differently. And if you have a goal that is in line with telling the truth, then that will evolve over time as well and grow into something continually more meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you really can't do anything meaningful if you're lying to yourself about like what you want and what your like objectives are.
Theranos, anyone?
The
No?
what now?
Theranos, the big biotech company that was promising to have a little box that could do one drop blood test for like any disease, and they got billions of dollars, and then they never came up with it, even though they were doing blood tests and like falsifying stuff. And
I haven't heard of that.
the leader of the company,
Sounds very Chinese.
no, she's very American.
Oh shit. That's how they got all the. There were a bunch of. This China has faked stem cells cloning like 6 times.
Yeah, but they probably gotten it right like 12.
Yeah.
They
I
probably
mean,
get it right and then tell us that they faked it.
yeah, I mean, that seems pretty likely.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was fake the whole time.
Wait a minute.
Siri American. You can't do that.
All right, let's
Let me just be casually racist here for 5
Yeah.
seconds.
It
It
seems
happens.
uncalled for.
You're living a life lie,
I'm secretly, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. That's pretty much everything here. He said something about one of Milton's ideas where he said stubborn refusal to change is in the face of error not only meant ejection from heaven and subsequent degeneration into ever deepening hell, but the rejection of redemption itself. So you kind of like obviate any kind of like, that's kind of what we're talking about. Like you can't do anything meaningful if the things you're attempting to do are based on lies or untruths.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. That's hard. I think this is probably one of the hardest rules to follow, just because you have to constantly be like really examining your motives. Because this one, I guess, really 7 and 8 together. Like most of the time, the reason that you're doing something expedient is because of a lie.
Yeah.
Like,
Whether it's to yourself or someone else.
yeah, and I mean, really, the ones to other people, like that's a smaller issue that to me stems from the lying.
Culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how it
But
goes
it's
in.
like, yeah, it's like if you lie to yourself, that's way worse, I guess, because worse
you lie to
you
yourself, then you have to lie to everybody else.
Yeah.
because you're lying. Yeah, it's because
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I, in that vein, I like how he talks about, he doesn't really use these words, but like the development of like intuition and like working with that and learning to kind of go with your gut and interpret your gut feelings, your higher self, whatever, the voice inside you, and like understand what it's saying and how it's saying it and why it's saying those things, and to, act on those things in a way that produces more truth rather than lies.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Because really, like, you have to get to the truth first, and then you're dealing with reality, and then you can decide what to do then on. It's kind of like the Buddhist concept of acceptance and then right action. Like, to really accept the situation, like, is really to look at it in truth, and then only then can you like move forward.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was
For real, 100.
the part where he talks about like culture degenerating and how culture
Yeah.
is almost like is always in a semi-dead state, and we're kind of going back into the past and bringing forth like the jewels and reestablishing them in new frameworks in order to continually rejuvenate it, and that's how culture progresses. But
Yeah.
that's done through like a framework of the people who are trying to like live truth.
Rescue your civilization from the underworld, etc., etc. Like you gotta go down to go up, kind of a thing.
Yeah, and then at the end he's like, he goes through a list of things, but he's like, if anything's bad, try telling the truth. That's how we make paradise.
Because it's like, if it's like, how are things going? Do we need to correct anything? And they're like, everything is going terribly. And it's like, yeah, fix it. Don't just lie about it, because then what happens?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like you said at the beginning. Like, you have to admit, the first step is admitting that there's a problem.
Yeah, and meaning it.
Yeah.
I guess that goes back to the whole like the second thing, the whole like don't lie to yourself,
Yeah.
because then you have to lie to everyone else.
Yeah. Okay. Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. All right. Assume the person you're listening to might know something you don't. I like it. He starts this off by saying, genuine conversation is exploration, articulation, and strategizing. When you're involved in a genuine conversation, you're listening and talking, but mostly listening. Listening is paying attention. It's weird to think about because it's like our mode of existence is mostly in a state of conversation, or what we would think of as conversation. But when you actually think about the mechanics of that conversation, like most of the time, we're just talking to ourselves. And like, if there's some communication that happens, that's good. And if there's some like mutual understanding, that's good. But the point is usually just like to put our thoughts out there for our own benefit.
Yeah. He says, the people I listen to need to talk because that's how people think. People need to think, otherwise they wander blindly into pits. When people think, they stimulate the world, and that's how and plan how to act in it.
Yeah, I
Um,
made a note on that. I thought that was great. People need to think, otherwise they walk blindly into pits. And then he goes
yeah, I
on to
don't know
talk
if
about like
you've.
okay.
Sorry, I don't know if you've ever noticed, like, if you've ever been like in a conversation about like something political or whatever. A lot of the time, I don't even know what my opinion is on something
Mm-hmm.
until I start talking about it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
have to like talk my way through like why I think the way that I do, and then
Right.
like if you're talking to somebody else, they can poke holes in it. But
Yeah.
even that, like, even even most of the time, that'll just shift the way that I realize that I think about it.
the craziest shit is when people say shit that like changes how you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think it's like obviously this is the point he's making, that it's really important to like do your best to try and do that all the time, to have like as deep as a transformational conversation at every point that you can, because that's how you transform, knowledge into wisdom, is by developing what you think and how you think about it, and whether that's a moral, belief, value, ethic that you hold like as an ideal, all through conversation. And like obviously, like we've been saying, the first step is, I guess in this case it's not admitting, but it's realizing that it takes conscious effort to engage in that kind of like communion.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this, Jonathan, like you can really tell, not only when someone that you're talking to, like one-on-one or in another situation, when they're doing that, you can tell because of the attention they're giving you and the thoughtfulness and the return that they give back is usually, not combative, and it doesn't have the signs of like posturing and other things. But when you're observing someone else have a conversation, it's really interesting and pleasing and like I don't know, almost enlightening or inspiring to see someone who you understand is having a conversation, but they think about the subject in two different potentially opposing ways, and they're like reasoning through it or positing on either side of their opinions or thoughts on it, and having a meaningful discussion, like from all those different angles. It's really apparent.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the time, I know that a lot of the time when I've had like a decision I wanted to make, sometimes the best thing to do is like just talk to somebody about it. And if they just listen, like you'll, I'll just figure out what I want based on my talking through it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's so hard to do from the listener's standpoint.
Yeah, because I always want to have an opinion and interject my feelings and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I've keenly developed my yeah and and mm-hmm and nod.
Yeah, or like asking questions like, why does that make you feel that way? Or what did you think about that? Or
Yeah,
like just to get them to continue.
I've like it's kind of like sometimes people will like I found that that is like when there's like a way you can ask them to keep going, but it's like normal you have to like because some people don't explain themselves enough, but it you can tell like how people if someone is like legitimately asking you to continue versus just saying yeah and like oh shit what happened like that kind of thing. And it's like one thing that I've done, and I've started doing this as a habit to kind of like also make it seem like I'm listening more sometimes because it's. But at the same time, I've realized that that's like bad. It's like okay, so this is how you actually ask them to go, like because people I feel like people can kind of get that that what's happening sometimes. I don't know. Some people are okay with it though.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
I
I
mean, I
think
think.
one of the things, sorry,
Okay.
I think one of the things about this chapter is like y- by assuming that the person that you're listening to knows something that you don't, like you actually are interested in what they're saying. So
Yeah.
if you're portraying, I mean, you're not trying to get them to go on as a way to trick them or something.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a genuineness to it that uh, can be helpful there. But I think a lot of the time we're just like almost like sort of like posturing when we try to suggest a solution to someone else's problem.
Because it's like you want to know what you're talking about because it's like to
Yeah.
not know, like I've seen that with a lot. I've seen that with a lot of my friends from like high school when we all like meet up again after the years or whatever. If somebody's having a problem, everybody tries to act like they're like a dad talking to their son. You know,
Well, it's
it's
really
like
easy.
everybody we all knew each other when we were kids, so we're all like everybody's trying to be all like, oh yeah, I'm an adult now.
It's also really easy to see what looks like the obvious solution to someone else's problem. Like really easy, you know. Whereas when you're actually in that situation, it's just much harder to do.
Yeah, I
You need
always
so
noticed
many
that,
more like uh factors.
like the pristine hindsight. You look back and you're like, wow, there was such a simple solution to that, whatever life event I'm looking back on, and
Yeah.
you like sometimes I'll think about it and I'm like, man, I definitely talked to tons of people about that while it was happening, and they probably told me things that made a lot of sense, and none of them, for whatever reason, whether it was because the conversation was taking place for the wrong reasons on one or the other side, and um, it didn't affect me in a way such as to change the way I was thinking and give me an actual solution. And that might have been like symptom of like me or them not thinking that one or the other knew something that the other didn't.
Yeah. There's a thing the XKCD guy made that it was really interesting about like life decisions and looking back at them. He decided to, he said at one point after like a huge break, after he realized that like there was there was like a situation where he realized he was staying in for too long because he was like, well, what if it's not going to get any better? And he said he started cataloging all the times he thought that and recording the results. And it's like, I should have left earlier. I should have stayed, kind of a thing, like stayed in that situation, or I should have left earlier. And it was like something like 6-1 for I should have left earlier versus I should have stayed. You know, and
Yeah.
part of me wonders, it's like with stuff like that, how much of it is just like we grow and we realize how fucked this situation is,
I think it goes
or
back to the last
yeah.
chapter, and it's the lies that we tell ourselves
Yeah.
and what we've built up on that, and how painful it is to tear it back down again.
I think a cool part of like the having meaningful conversations, you know, admitting that or assuming that people know things that we don't, is the formation of useful memories. Joe Rogan likes to point out a lot how faulty memory is as far as like a fact recording device. And here, Jordan Peterson is talking about how memory is a tool. It's something that we use to formulate our ideas about the present and the future. And through conversation, these real conversations, or essentially like philosophizing out loud with people, developing uh, different ideas than the ones we had, you know, previously, we can, you know, talk about things that have happened in the past, memories, and essentially like distill them down and reformat them so they're useful either to the conversation or to us or both. And that's a really interesting way to look at the construct of memory, is as something that we can manipulate and format uh, at any point to change it into something that's like actionable or more meaningful, or at least more understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be right
Honestly,
back.
I like Joe's like rants about the human mind, you know, because I think yeah, it's like I remembered stuff completely wrong before, just because someone was like, oh yeah, like someone who had an obvious bias was like, yeah, don't you remember like this happened? And I was like they're like, don't you remember what this happening? And I'm like, I do, and it's like, okay, you're right, but it's like they weren't right. I was just,
So, memory in conversation.
oh yeah, it's super bad
What?
memory.
Oh, yeah, but well, that's one way to look at it, is that you shouldn't probably shouldn't rely on memory as a factual like data gathering tool, but as a device for constructing worldview and something that can be manipulated and reformatted to be more useful in formatting worldview. Um, and
So it's kind of like that's the explanation for us seemingly being like like not having the best memory, I guess.
No, I mean, I think these are two different things. I just thought it was interesting how you can look at memory as something that's potentially like unreliable in certain situations. But if you're looking at memory on another hand, unrelated to that, you can look at it in a positive light as something that you can utilize to, um, you know, gain wisdom about or insight into yourself through analysis and reformatting. And it's something malleable rather than something concrete that we can use to understand events or things that have happened or have been said to us or we said, and to, you know, change how we do things in the future or understand the past thereby.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, it's because honestly, we're just buggy video games with a lot of patches, and every single patch changes a bunch of shit. So we have to reformat certain things. It's like, let me just unspaghetti this shit real quick.
But yeah, but like how useful is that? He talks about how this might have been in the last chapter or maybe this one. Yeah, when he's talking about how basically, because there are so many things, so much spaghetti in our heads, we basically outsource the de-spaghettifying to other people, to the community, to the village. He says it takes a village to make a mind, or something like that.
Takes a village to unspaghetti.
Yeah, where if we just sit alone in loneliness, apart, then we tend to develop like neuroses and crazy thoughts, or we're much more prone to. And so, like evolutionarily, what we've come up with as the solution is to get that out loud and talk about it to people and have them say it back to us, and then potentially figure out how we feel about it once it's outside of our heads, or see how they feel about it, and then we can think about it differently ourselves.
Maybe that's why a lot of these like school shooters are people with no friends.
Hmm. That's possible.
You know, because it's
I
like
think
if you
that's
were
definitely part of it.
if you really had friends. I mean, like that's the thing. The complete sociopaths are the ones who have friends and still do horrible shit. But most of them have like enough of a they have enough social awareness, I guess, to not make it public. Whereas the people who have like no fucking things to bounce off people, or no people to bounce things off of, they're just like, well, I can bounce bullets off. I can try to bounce these bullets off of them. I guess I don't know. There was a bad joke there, but
I mean, one of the things he talks about, why you should read books about, you know, the concentration camps and things like that is, or like why you should read the letters from the Columbine shooters and stuff, or, you know, if you look at a lot of these situations, like
I've read Elliot Rogers' manuscripts. That's about
number
it.
of terrible things that would have to happen to you in a row before you become willing to do similar things is not actually that many.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's kind of strange to read a lot of these like shooters manuscripts, because I've been doing that because I'm bored. Well, I'm not bored. I've been doing that like because I was like actually interested in it after I watched American Psycho. But like
Yeah.
a lot of them, like the Columbine kids and like Elliot Rogers, and it's like really a lot of it has to do with like just their families. Uh, like a lot of the times were just like super duper. I don't want to say unsupportive, but like contributed to the problem. And
Sure.
it's
I mean, I think a
I don't
lot of
know.
it
It's like
has to do with really, it just goes back to the Cain and Abel story. I mean, he pretty much
yeah,
summed it up perfectly.
yeah. No,
If
I forgot
if
about that.
things don't work out, like that's why they like that's how you would feel that way. And I think that a lot of the time we find it easier just to say, "Oh, these people are monsters,"
I
and
hate
then we
that.
blame it on something like gun control, which is obviously a factor. I mean, that's a complicated issue as well. But
It's like they're Nazis, and it's like no, no, they're not. I
well,
mean, some of them are, but
well, even that is a an oversimplification.
And you have to
What
get to being
what
a
kind of
Nazi.
yeah, what sort of things have to happen to a person to make them want to be a Nazi?
Surprisingly little.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like that. I don't like. It's like how everyone is like, oh, that no, the Joker going one bad day. That's the difference between you and me.
Yeah.
And everyone is like, oh, that's not how it works, but that's how it works.
I mean, he
that's how
says it
it is.
repeatedly, like that all the time we're trying to, or a lot of the time, many people seem to be amazed or don't understand how or why people do crazy things or violent things, and think that these things are extraordinary, that these are the things out of the ordinary. And Jordan says about many issues, not only violent things, that it's actually less hard to figure out why people do bad things, why people are depressed, why people have anxiety, why people kill people. It's much easier to understand that, or to justify it within the scope of life as suffering, than it is to look at the people who don't do that and understand why.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons, going back to why we were talking about why we think Jordan Peterson is so popular in general, is I think that a lot of this sort of taking responsibility for your actions and like finding something meaningful is really one of the only alternatives to nihilism and like suicide and like these sort of atrocities.
Right.
Like
And
either you're doing something meaningful or you're not, and like meaninglessness is probably one of the worst things that like I could think of.
yeah, I mean, if you've ever had, so I think with enough meaninglessness, you like it kind of spurs you to go find something, or
And
you
that's kind of
grasp.
what depression is, right? It's
Yeah.
just like a lack
I
of.
actually have a really interesting story about this, and also how I lost all of my savings. But um,
These bitcoins.
no, it wasn't Bitcoins. This happened when I was like 19. And this actually goes back to a lot of the points made in chapter 8. Yeah. So I this was like right after high school, and I had like worked at this warehouse job and gotten a car. And then I was like, okay, well, I have like 2 grand saved up, and I have a car, I have transportation. I am going to go live with my best friends and in this apartment and just continue working. Well, the warehouse I was working at lost our contract with the boot company that was the ones providing like 80% of our stuff. So like I was laid off, and so was like everybody else. So I was like, you know what? I just got in the apartment, so it was like 2 months into the apartment, and I was like, you know what? Because I had just been planning on working, and like I'm not gonna go to school. I'm just gonna like do a bunch of art. I'm just gonna do art shit and like try and get popular online and stuff. But so I was like, okay, well, I have 2 grand. I can live for like 6 months on that. And so I did. And I actually did not produce one piece of artwork that entire time. I just smoked weed. And because I like the thing was, is like I wasn't being truthful with myself about like my intentions, because while I wanted to
Was doing
do,
what was expedient.
yeah, no, I was, because I was like, I'll do it when I feel like it, kind of a thing. But that's the thing about it, is like you're never gonna feel like, yeah, to get better, you have to admit your shit, and like it's hard. That's not a comfortable thing to do.
Yeah.
It's taken me till now to it. I guess until I left Value to admit that, and this was when I was like 18, 19. Yeah, I was like 19. So and so I yeah, but it was fucking horrible. It was like the worst fucking thing I've ever done, was just sit around and smoke weed and play Tekken.
Yep.
It was, God, how the fuck did I do that?
Yeah, and I bet it wasn't a very enjoyable experience.
One day at a
Yeah.
time.
I mean, it was great for about a week, and then all it was just an anxiety riddled nightmare, because I was putting so much pressure on myself to do something. I was like,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah,
There was no meaning to it.
yeah.
It was like you're just
It was
doing
everything you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we've all done that. I look back how much World of Warcraft I played,
Oh
and that's just
God.
Bro.
it's a time hole. Like it's just gone. Like I can never get any of that time back.
That
You know?
20 hours a week for 10 years.
But I mean, that can go for
Good
anything.
Lord.
I mean, I think video games are one of the most obvious wastes of time.
Yeah.
Um,
It's very
Unless
clear.
you're like someone who plays them and wants and is getting better at them, but then that's like, why? Like, I don't know.
I mean,
Unless it's your job. I mean,
if it's your job, then that's kind of a different
Yeah.
situation. Most of the time, we play video games to just like turn our brain off.
Well, that what I'm saying is that like it's like playing chess. It's like you can play chess and turn your brain off, and it could just be something you enjoy. But there are people who like actively use that to get better at stuff. But it's a lot of the time it's people who don't have like a discipline in other areas.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, again, that kind of goes back to like doing things that are meaningful. You could meaningfully play or do
Yeah.
anything, really. I mean,
You can meaningfully yo-yo. They're professional yo-yo players.
sure. Yeah. I mean, but a lot of the time we're just doing
Yeah.
stuff because it's expedient. Like, I don't want to face the reality of my situation. So I'm gonna just veg out on video games for 6 months,
Dude,
and
dude,
then
yeah, or fucking whatever's on your phone.
yeah,
Like I just don't want to deal with what's around me at the time. So instead of thinking about the situation or
Hashtag delete
engaging with
Facebook.
it, yeah, no, fucking delete Facebook. I'm going to Instagram, and that'll make me want to post more artwork.
Yeah. I had to do away with all social media and all video games.
yeah. Basically, the way that I've pretty much done that as well, and like I'll play games with people that are in the room with me
Yeah.
because that's a social like
Especially when they're Mario Kart masters.
yeah. I mean that to me that's different. That's a social interaction that
Mm-hmm.
it
It's an
has a
exchange.
purpose. Like it has a purpose. It has a
Mhm.
meaning. Whereas when I'm alone in my room doing that, like it's
Checking
not
Bitcoin.
gonna what?
Checking Bitcoin.
Oh man. I mean that could all have meaning too, but it really just anything. Like we just waste so much time. But I don't know. That's why that chapter is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yes,
The coolest part was for me was at the end when he kind of goes into talking about like group philosophizing, how that's like the highest form of conversation, and like that's probably what we should strive for every conversation to be, at least in part, because
uh,
that's how we develop wisdom. That was kind of like the Socratic method is just asking questions, and that kind of ties into having this internal dialogue, internal conversation with yourself while having that with other people. So you're like active listening and talking to yourself and to other people, and you assume that they know something you don't. So like all those things together equal this like developmental kind of conversation that has like potentially transformative effects.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a lot of the time without realizing it, we aren't actually trying to learn anything new.
Mm-hmm.
Like we actually want everything that we know to be right,
Yeah.
complete.
So
But that's not only is that like not like that shouldn't be what we want because we would say that we know we don't know everything and we want to learn more.
yeah.
It's like dangerous to do that. So I don't know. It's hard. It's one. I think all three of these things are where this book starts to get like
Real.
really
whoa,
real.
dude. Whoa, man.
It's happening. That's it. That was
Good
great.
book club.
Cool.
Thanks for listening. It's been a blast. To get engaged, head over to sequesteredsuperlative.com and subscribe with your email to get all the latest updates, including new book discussion audio, blog posts, and more. So long until next time.